everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Coach Talk. I am just extremely happy because I have my girl here with me tonight, Miss Linda Rhyne. And before we get into all of her fabulosities, just let me do some pre-work before we get this thing going. So as you know, or if you don't, if you are new to coaching or new to me or new to my platform, I am Melanie Matthews Calhoun, and I am the host and creator of the Mind Your Coaching Institute, which the Institute is happening in a couple of weeks on July 10th, Wednesday from 11 a.m. until 4 p.m. And if you want to log on to this very informative, transformational, impactful event, go to www.mindyourcoachinginstitute.com and you can register there. I am also the author of 3 books, The Formula 101 Must-Have Forms for Instructional Coaches, which has all of your forms, buzzword coaching cycles. If you're looking for a coaching cycle, this book will give you a coaching cycle. I also am the author of Inside Instructional Coaching, and that book is really meant more for an aspiring coach or someone who is just starting off. It's an A to Z guide of everything you need to know about how to coach strategically. And The Productive Coach, which is a journal. It's a habit tracker, and it has enough room for you to record over a 180 days. There's a habit tracker in there, someplace to track your time, someplace for you to write your most important dates. There's a calendar and everything in there, so you might be interested in that as well. So enough about me. 26 years in education, 17 or 18, I've lost count, of being a coach, and I absolutely love every part of coaching. There are many parts of coaching that I love, but one of the parts is meeting people. Like I've met Linda Rhyne. And Linda Rhyne is the owner of Linda Rhyne Consulting and founding president of the Reading League North Carolina. Linda is an award-winning educator with over 16 years of experience in education, including Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, one of the nation's 20 largest urban school districts located in Charlotte, North Carolina. She has over 10 years of instructional coaching experience and believes that everyone deserves a coach, and everyone does deserve a coach. That's no lie. So without any further ado, Linda is really, I'm so interested because I do have a couple of questions on how to prep for your coaching conversations. This is something, if you're not out of school yet as of this recording, get this, write these things down, write these tips down, these secrets down, because this might be something you can use in your final coaching conversations for the year. This information is valuable throughout the school year. So we just want to make sure you write it down and get everything that's going to be dropped today. Pick it up as we're putting it down. And we also have something special for you, a guide. I love it. I'm going to show it in a minute. It's so lovely. Okay, again, without further ado, this time for real, Linda, welcome.
Oh my gosh, your energy. You are just the best. I swear. It's like, what a joy to join you and talk coaching. I mean, we
I
could do
know,
this
right?
for hours.
Right. Really for hours.
Actually, we have before.
We have. So, and I'm going to tell this quick story because it's so important. I get so excited and elated when I meet people in person, my friends, my virtual friends out there in the social media space. I get so excited when I meet them in person. So Linda had I wanted to say a job, but that sounds so like mafia. Linda had an opportunity to come to the state of Michigan to work for a school district. And I'm so happy that the school district was so close to me because we had an opportunity to literally break bread over dinner. We ate dinner, we caught up, we got to see each other in the flesh. And so I love meeting people, and I absolutely loved meeting Linda. She is just as kind and gentle and sweet in person as she is on social media. So if any of you follow Linda, which I know many of you do, she's that in person too.
Oh, the feeling is mutual. And I'll tell you, I am so excited that we're going to be at all these coaching conferences this
Yeah.
year, the ones that are virtual, but also the in-person ones. I
Yes.
can't wait to give you a squeeze again.
I know, right? And eat and just talk and let down our hair and just let go and let free. And if you're going to be at any of these, conferences, you have to meet up with us. You have to.
Yeah.
So, Linda,
Yes.
prepping for coaching conversations.
Yes.
This is an excellent topic in that coaches, especially newer coaches, often find it difficult to have enough confidence or to be courageous enough to have these real coaching conversations. And before we get into the coaching conversation, can you just explain to us what's the difference between a regular conversation and a coaching conversation?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. So, in a regular conversation, it's one that you can just like be down the hallway, right? And have somebody flag you leaning
Mm-hmm,
out their classroom. You might be doing a morning check-in with people, um, checking, make sure everybody's good for the day. And somebody flags you down and a conversation ensues, right? So you're
mm-hmm,
kind of find yourself in the middle of a conversation. It would be normal for someone to ask you a question and you have to turn around and get back to them,
mm-hmm,
right? But in a coaching conversation, the coach is in a position, they're in the coaching position and their job is to facilitate that conversation.
mm-hmm,
So they're meant to be the guide, to be the person helping make this conversation go well,
mm-hmm,
um, in a way that honors the teacher regardless of experience, right? So even if you're a newer coach but you're supporting a veteran teacher who has many years of experience, you still are the one expected to be kind of facilitating what that conversation looks like.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so for me, that's the main difference, right? Like you're not necessarily facilitating that hallway conversation, you're just finding yourself in it, right?
mm-hmm,
And you might even mentor somebody or kind of find yourself coaching in
mm-hmm,
the middle of that. But in a coaching conversation, because it's part of your job, you are expected to be the one kind of leading how that
mm-hmm.
conversation how that conversation moves forward.
Mm-hmm. And I thought that it would be important for us to distinguish between the two because a coaching conversation is very intentional.
Mhm.
And a regular conversation, like you were just saying, passing by, while you might talk some coaching within that conversation, you might talk some strategies within that conversation. But a coaching conversation is much different than a regular conversation, and it takes skills.
Right.
Having a coaching conversation um, is, I would like to liken it to kind of like a work of art. You have to be skillful in doing that and with being able to know when to make certain moves within that conversation.
Yep.
Um, and coaching conversations are also, like you said, honoring people where they are at that time and going from there. So a coaching conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, isn't something that is a pre-planned conversation in that you go in with all of the answers. A coaching
Right.
conversation is something that happens in the moment, but it's also intentional.
Yes, that's another really important point, I think, because it would be easy for what I want to share tonight to come across as you should be completely planned all the way through. But in fact, I find that preparing for the potentials in the conversations, right,
Mhm,
allows you as a coach to be more responsive and less
mhm,
rigid because you won't find yourself wondering, like, well, what do I say in response to that? Where and
mhm,
just lead you down a path where you only had one idea,
mhm,
one planned way of starting off the conversation and how it might go. Um, so yeah, you certainly want to guide and facilitate the conversation, and you may have some ideas about how you want the conversation to go or where you would maybe want the conversation to end up with the bite-sized action or something like
mhm,
that.
mhm,
But there are ways to facilitate your questions and plan your questions that allow
mhm.
you to do that and still allow you to be responsive to the teacher that you're working with.
And so, what this is what I love about tonight's coach talk is that Linda prepared this. This is for you all.
I got a handout for you.
She has a handout for you, and it's in color and it looks pretty. Anything formatted nicely automatically catches my attention at least. So, Linda, I want you to, if just lay out the steps. Lay out the
Yep.
steps of how you can actually, let's just get to the meat of it. How can you prepare for a coaching conversation?
Well, before we do that, Melanie, if we can talk about why this is important,
Yes, please.
because one of them, I think we all know how important relationship building is
Mm-hmm.
in a coaching and teacher relationship. And to me, prepping for a coach conversation can be really challenging, especially if coaches are finding themselves having just come out of a classroom-based position.
Mm-hmm.
It feels really difficult to sit down and spend time prepping for a coaching conversation. It feels counterintuitive to what we are used to, where we had a 45-minute planning period and that was all you got. And that's when you plan, and all of your other planning time happened outside of school.
Mm-hmm.
So I say all of that to say, like, not only is prepping for your conversations and coaching part of your job,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's also a way that we show respect to the teachers that we support, because
Mm-hmm.
we are asking them to give us some of their time to have this coaching conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're in a school system that is creating planning periods specifically for coaching, many of the teachers are choosing to use one of their planning periods or staying after school times like those, and really sharing their time with us. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a way of respecting them to maximize what that time is by us
Mm-hmm.
being prepared. Because if we just walk in and ask the question of, well, how do you think it went? Right? That does not that doesn't show them the respect that they deserve,
Mm-hmm.
nor does it position us as, ready for this
Yeah.
position.
And I'm glad that you slowed down and tapped into the why, because that's again imperative when we're sitting down, like you said, on other people's time that they're giving to us. I recently had a situation where I was being evaluated, and my evaluator wanted to see me have either a coaching conversation or for me to be presenting something.
Mm,
And so I had invited her in for a coaching conversation, and I reached out to a teacher, and it was someone who I had just recently worked with, very recently. And I asked her, would she be willing to do it? And she told me yes. And I said, okay, well, this is the time that, my supervisor has carved out. Can you do it during this time? And she said, if we can have it for 15 minutes, because that's my lunch. And I really felt bad because I never want to take people's, especially lunch, because depending on where you are, your lunch could be 20, 30 minutes.
right.
And she was willing to give me that time for me to be evaluated. And, I was so grateful for her. What happened is that my supervisor canceled and we didn't have to do it, but I was ready with gift cards in my hand, like, here's lunch on me, because I'm very appreciative of it. And like you
Yeah.
said, we do have to honor those things and realize what teachers are sacrificing, so to speak, because
Hmm.
I know that if you're working in a district with a union contract, and I don't speak down on union contracts, but that, I mean, it's really not a lot that you can do to, because if they're going to meet with you, they are on their time. If not, they're not going to do it. And
Right.
so, and I come from that background, from
Right.
a union contract. So I'm very careful as to how I ask to meet, because not, hey, let's meet tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Yeah, I see you have a prep. No, I allow the teachers to tell me when it's
Mhm.
the best time for us to meet, because you have to just be very sensitive and mindful of those situations. So thank
Yep.
you for backtracking and letting us get down to the why before we get to the meat of it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the other why for the coach, right, is so that you increase your confidence
Mm-hmm.
in going into the coaching conversation because you've taken time to prep.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can feel a little bit better about, okay, I'm ready to give this a go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I find too, I tend to be someone who sometimes struggles on their feet, right? When I'm in a coaching conversation. And I even found that when, back when we had to do literacy conferences and I had to like tell a student a teaching point in the moment, I was terrible at that.
Mhm,
It's
mhm,
really poor at that. I wanted to go into it prepared, knowing what I knew or having more student data, right? Because I sometimes overanalyze. And so this is also personally like helpful for me to just
mhm,
feel like, okay, I've done my due diligence. I'm as prepared as I can be.
mhm.
And hopefully that increases the effectiveness of this conversation.
Yeah, you have to go in with some kind of plan instead of going in just cold.
Yeah.
Because like you said, especially if you're a newer coach, you really don't know all the moves you can make in a moment. And
Right.
so having a plan will, like you said, increase your confidence and make that conversation a little bit more digestible for you as a coach, because it
Yep.
can be overwhelming, especially if you're a newer teacher and you're coaching veteran teachers, and that could be quite intimidating. I've been there.
Right.
I know how it feels. And
Right.
so having a support or having a plan when you go in, and I want you to know also, audience members, that it's nothing wrong with having a support. So if you have notes or whatever, that use those. It's fine
Hmm.
for you to have a support to help guide you.
Yep.
Coaching is not meant for you to be able to do everything just top of mind. You have, oh, it's all going to come down on. It's not meant for that. Linda and I have been there. I don't want to say like been there, done that, but we've been there. We've walked in your shoes. So we know and
Oh yeah.
understand how it feels, how you may feel when you're approaching coaching conversations, which again, why I was so happy when I'm like prepping for coaching conversation. Yes, because this is a big chunk of our work that we do.
That's right.
And it can really kind of determine what kind of relationships you continue to build with teachers.
Yep.
So
All right.
again, yes.
We can get into the real nitty gritty.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'll stop circling that. Okay, so the first thing that I put down on the handout for everybody is how important it is to like before you're going into the conversation that you're reviewing some sort of data source,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if this is a conversation and you're having it's a part of your coaching cycle, you might have had a pre-meeting with a teacher, gone in and visited their classroom, and then you have some kind of notes, right? Observation notes, video, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you've completed a checklist for the teacher. That's a really helpful data source for you to take time to review before you get in the meeting, even if you're planning on analyzing that alongside the teacher in the
Mm-hmm.
meeting, right? But taking time to look it over so that you can think through like, oh, what is this telling me? Like, am I seeing patterns? Am I seeing something that I would want us to be thinking about as maybe a bite-sized action that the teacher can tackle in the
Mm-hmm.
next coaching cycle? Um, that's all helpful for you to do before you then find yourself in the meeting looking at it and then not, feeling like now there's 10 things and I'm not sure which thing I want to
Mm-hmm.
ask the teacher to be trying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Doing that also helps you be clear, like when the teacher let's say you are looking alongside the data source with the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
student data too, right? And what the teacher brings up as something that they're seeing also lets you know as the coach how in sync you are with like the perspectives that you have in your analysis approach, as well as what kind of supports this teacher might need. Because
Mm-hmm.
if their response to that data is way off, right,
Mm-hmm.
then as a coach, you might have to pivot a little bit differently in terms of your support for this teacher. Um, or they kind of respond to that data and they have a clear plan. They know exactly where they're going. Like now, you can back off of that level of support and just help facilitate that alongside them.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's a really important place to start. And if it's student or classroom data, right? Same idea. You want to make sure that you're spending time analyzing it so you come in prepared and can be the coach, that
Mm-hmm.
you're not having to spend time doing the work alongside
Mm-hmm.
the teacher. It's a second round for you when you're in that coaching conversation.
And then when you're bringing data to the table, you're taking the focus off of the teacher. Like,
Yep.
I'm not talking about you, but we have evidence here. This
Every
is
time.
our third point, so to speak.
Yep.
Here's the evidence. We're looking at the data and we're conversing over what the data is showing. And
That's right.
so if you have a teacher who may not be comfortable at first with having these coaching conversations with you, this is a great way to neutralize the situation so that that teacher doesn't feel like he or she is being put on the spot.
Yep. Yeah, because think about the kind of phrases you'll find yourself using when you're looking at that third viewpoint with the teacher. No longer is it, I really loved when you blah, 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 right? It's like, here's what what are you seeing?
Mm-hmm.
What are you noticing, right? Like, how long did that section of this lesson take?
Mm-hmm.
Did that match your plan, right? Like, it leads you down a very different path, um, in your coaching conversation.
And it has teachers doing engaging in automatic reflection
Yep.
without you even having to ask them to think about, because when you're opening with what do you notice, you know, right there they're analyzing the data and they're doing some personal reflection as the conversation goes on, because they're thinking about what they did during that time,
Right.
which led to what the evidence is showing. So
Right.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's so different than a conversation that says like, well, how do you think it went? Right? Because as important as that is, the confidence of a teacher, their own experience during that lesson is very important,
Mm-hmm.
right? But also it can very much be different than what actually happened
Mm-hmm.
during a lesson, for good or for worse, right? So
That's
like,
right.
you as the coach might leave that lesson and be like, wow, like that lesson bombed, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
of what you saw, what you observed as that outside observer. And the teacher might come back to the conversation and be like, I thought it went really well.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh God, like, what are we doing? How do we have this conversation now? Like, we completely disagree. Like, I don't, so to me, I'm always like, let's just look at the evidence
Mm-hmm.
and remove the need for us to feel super awkward about having very different viewpoints about how something went.
Look, quick story. It reminds me of when my niece was taking her driver's training test, the road test. And so after we finished, because I was that person,
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel so sorry for her because she's not going to get her license. And they were like, congratulations. I'm like, what? She did what? So it kind of reminds me of that,
Like, I
because
don't want her
what I
driving on the road
felt
with me.
was not really a great driving performance. It's not what the instructor felt.
Right. Yep. See?
I'm
See?
like, okay.
I bet if you had said, like, what evidence do you have to support her passing? Might have been
I
a
know,
different
right?
conversation.
I know that would have been a great question.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I
So,
love it.
and then step two is,
Yep. Step 2 is create the agenda and send it to the teacher ahead of time, which backs up your data review too, right? But some of the things that I suggested having room for, even if you don't have the content filled out, but planning for those chunks of time,
mm-hmm,
making sure that you're planning for catch-up time, right? Like
mm-hmm,
planning for the relationship building, and getting clear on how long you want that to go,
mm-hmm,
because sending that agenda and with a timestamp or how the length of time allows
mm-hmm,
you to cut that off too,
mm-hmm,
and get into the conversation again out of respect for the teacher. We
mm-hmm,
might feel bad, stopping a conversation where you're catching up, but at the same time, the whole purpose of the conversation is to facilitate what you're doing as a coach for this
mm-hmm,
teacher. So sticking to the agenda actually is a respectful move for the
mm-hmm,
teacher. So making sure that you're planning for that buffer time that you need to transition. Hey, how you doing? Fill me in. What's going on, right? Give me the good news. But then also planning for variable time. So you might plan for, like, if I end up with only 10 minutes to talk with this teacher, right? These are the must do thing. Like, you were planning for 15 minutes in
mm-hmm,
your evaluation conversation,
yep,
right? So it's like, if I have 15 minutes, what are the 3 things or whatever? Like, what are the
mm-hmm,
must do things that we have to make sure we talk about or do together here? And what might be a may do? And it would be nice to get to if we have the time, but it's okay if it doesn't
mm-hmm,
happen. And then also making sure that you've then thought about, like, can I cover this content in the scheduled time that we have, or am I
Mhm.
over planning? I love telling people to plan as though they have 10 minutes with a person.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, if you have 10 minutes, what are you going to say?
Gets them to the point.
It gets you to the point and it leaves room. Like, if you plan for 10 minutes, but you actually have 20,
Mhm.
then either you end the conversation early and you are now that person's favorite person in the whole entire world because
Right.
you just gave them the gift of time, or you've left room for that variability that
Mhm.
inevitably will happen in a conversation because you can't predict how the person is going to respond
Mhm.
or what paths you may find yourself going down, even when you're prepped.
Mhm.
Um, so I really find it's helpful to just build in that time, and make sure that the teacher's clear on like, hey, this is the agenda, this is the
Yeah.
protocol I want to follow, right? I plan on using a timer to help me stay
Mhm.
honoring your time so that we start on time, end on time.
Mhm.
All of that I think is helpful prep for coaching conversation and messages the right thing to the teacher.
And when you're talking about agendas, so this is
Mhm,
something that I've heard other coaches do, and I just want your opinion. And this isn't a right or wrong thing; it's just a preference thing.
mhm,
So I know of coaches who create agendas for their coaching conversations, but they create a running agenda
mhm.
and it's shared
Yep,
with that person. What are your thoughts about that?
that is what I do. I do. I love the features in Google Docs
Mm-hmm.
where you can use your titles and headers and all of that. So I
Mm-hmm.
often we create one document for the year and I use the heading feature so that it's now like a bookmark link, on the outline on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just, that way the reason I love that is because whatever I'm typing, they can see,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no secrets about what we just did,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then both myself and the person that I'm working with have something to reference and say like, what
Mm-hmm.
did we say last time,
Yeah.
right? And then I as the coach have something to reference myself to support my coaching cycle tracking
Mm-hmm.
and say
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's an easy data point, like how many times did I meet with this person? I don't know. Let me count my headers
Mm-hmm.
for the year, you know. Um, yeah, so I love the idea of that.
Yeah. I like it
So
again because it's transparent. You know, it's in real time, it's a live document,
yeah,
and it increases your credibility with having kept those conversations confidential.
yep,
So everything is there. You know, this is what I'm doing. It's all transparent. I'm not doing anything behind your back. This is our agenda. You can look at it whenever you can, whenever you like. So I do. I really like that. And in this day and age, I think that coaches, if you don't already do it, it might be a somewhat of a shift, but I think it's a great idea that you do. For so many reasons, accountability, you know, proving what you've done, being transparent, having a reference point. Like Linda says, she goes back and she counts the bookmarks to tell you how many times they've had a meeting. So you can get data from that. So
yep,
very, very useful tip
yep.
for it's a little secret. That's one of the secrets.
It's a really helpful tool.
Uh-huh.
And like you said, the transparency part is the relationship builder, but also a way to prep for your coaching conversations.
Boom. And with that, number three.
Okay. So the other point that I wanted to make, is just that, okay, so we go into these coaching conversations, we've done the data review, we've thought about our agenda, and then we're getting ready to dive in. And because I'm an evidence person, I
Mhm.
often don't start my coaching conversations with like, well, what do you think? Like, how'd it go?
Mhm.
I normally am choosing a more targeted question to kick off the coaching conversation, right?
Okay.
Like, hey, okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this. What are you seeing?
Mhm.
Right? I have my notes, but let's see what you're seeing, right? Or like if the teacher did the pre-work, maybe
Mhm.
like, okay, bring me your notes. What did you see? Here's what I started seeing, right? Here's what I was thinking. Um, and so I've also found myself in conversations where like I might need to ask like, tell me how your lesson, like where did you see the learning target showing up, right? Like
Mhm.
where did you see like very clear questions about the lesson itself,
Mhm.
and asking the teacher to reflect on the evidence that supports or doesn't,
Mhm.
what we were working on. And so as a result of that type of planning with that question, with whatever your initial question is, you're often finding yourself in a coaching stance, right? You're kind of positioning the teacher as the one with the knowledge, the one with the expertise. And then you can anticipate, how is that teacher going to respond, right? Are they going to respond in a way that demonstrates they have the knowledge about what, effective instruction looks like? They have the knowledge about and a clear plan about what they want to do with this information from this lesson. That leads you down a very different path of remaining in a coaching stance, using probing questions and pulling out from the teacher what they've got, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if somebody responds and they demonstrate that they don't really understand the question that you're asking
Mhm.
because they lack the content knowledge, not because you were confusing, right? But because they lack the content knowledge needed about whatever the question is related to that effective instruction, that leads you down a very different path and potentially a different stance as a coach,
Mhm.
where you might have to be prepared to be more collaborative and not necessarily using the probing questions, but rather like offering some ideas like, hey, well, here's some ideas. Like maybe we could take a look at some of these and think about how this supports where you want to go.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really important to anticipate those potential responses and then the path it leads you down
Mhm.
in the conversation for multiple reasons, right? Because number one, you're anticipating the responses, and whether you're actually practicing with a person out loud, you're actually practicing the coaching conversation by thinking through all of those responses, even if you're just like writing them down for yourself.
Mhm.
Um, and then you're also able to consider the resources that you would need for different teacher responses, right? I hate being the coach in a conversation where I'm like, I know I have this thing, like just give me a minute and I'll find it. And then I'm like searching my Google Drive and it's not popping up. And now I've wasted 3 minutes and I
Yeah.
have to, and then I also still have to say, like, I'll follow up with it. Right.
Mhm.
And if the point of prepping for the conversation is to respect the teacher's time, then I want to avoid that all at all costs.
Mhm.
Right. Um, so it gives me an opportunity to come with resources at my fingertips more
Mhm.
so than spending time searching.
Mhm.
Um, and then two, it allows me, by thinking about these pathways of conversation, it allows me to reflect on, am I leading this down to a bite-sized action for this
Mhm.
teacher? Like,
Mhm.
is this going to be an effective coaching conversation? Are we going to find ourselves with something actionable that the teacher can do and I can support as the
Mhm.
coach? So for me, it's an opportunity for reflective practice before we are in front of a teacher and having to figure out what we're trying to say.
Mhm.
Which is why I have the flow chart on the page too, to kind of map it out. Like, okay, the response tells me this, right? Does it keep me in a coaching stance? Yes. Okay, great. Then I'm going to ask another question. No. Oh, I'm going to move to a collaborative
Mhm.
stance.
Mhm.
And that's
Coaching,
based on Lipton and Wellman's work.
yeah, and yeah, and I love their work. Been looking at their work for years,
Yeah, it's
for
so good.
years. Um, so I noticed you said a couple of
I said a
words
lot.
a couple of times, bite-sized. So
Yes.
sometimes when we're having these coaching conversations, especially the initial conversation, and you might ask, what is it that I should be looking for, or what do you want to focus on?
Mhm.
And sometimes, let's say a teacher may say, I want to focus on student engagement, increasing
Yep.
student engagement. It sounds like one thing, but it's not one thing. How do you get teachers or coachees to pare down for that
Oh,
one thing, that singular thing that will make, well, you might not know, but that could make an impact instead
yep.
of focusing on this big, grand thing?
So I think it's really important to ask for, like, what are you met how will you know that you've been successful with increasing student engagement, right?
Mhm.
So like what's the measurable way? If student
Mhm.
engagement is the topic, how are we measuring that?
Mhm.
right? Because what that allows us to do is to get clear on the actions that the teacher can make in order to increase student engagement. Because again, like the coach and the teacher might have very different understandings of
Mhm.
what student engagement looks like, right? So I would want to know from the teacher, um, well, what does that look like to you?
Mhm.
What does it
Mhm.
look like now that you want to change?
Mhm.
Right? And then that could lead you down very different paths. It might be that you need to do kind of a baseline visit of the teacher's classroom because they might not know where things
Mhm.
stand, right?
Mhm.
You might need to do kind of a base like, well, why don't I just come in? I'll take down some notes and we can look at it together, right?
Mhm.
And then you start your evidence-based conversation of like, here's the notes I took. What are we seeing, right? Because the question is like, is it lesson design? Is it teacher
Mhm.
actions? Is it student behaviors that, right? So like those are three very different things that a teacher might
Mhm.
need to work on, but all of them impact student engagement,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And until we have enough information, I as the coach wouldn't know what to tell the teacher.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, And so for me, I would want to do that with any conversation, especially if it was working with somebody new and establishing a goal. I'd want to get really clear on what are we measuring? What does
Mhm.
that look like to you? And then what does it look like to start
Mhm.
so that we know how we're progressing.
Mhm. Yeah, and the reason why I ask is because we don't have to go big on everything. There are so many things that can be picked apart, so to speak, that we
Yep.
can look at that might need to be improved. But how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
That's right.
So when we're aiming for those bite-sized pieces, those small things that might shift everything else into place, we don't want to start so big that it becomes frustrating for the teacher. It becomes frustrating for you because you can't keep up with it. Because in the world of coaching, it would be a dream if we only could work with one teacher, but our
Hmm.
caseloads are much larger than that. And
Hmm.
so, if you're working with everybody on everything, how are you really making an impact, and how is it going to affect student achievement, which is the ultimate goal?
Right.
So, choosing those small things, the small things. And it might be something that just seems so easy. And so, okay, yeah, she could do that or he can do that. But when you put it into practice and you start being real intentional about looking at those things, it can make a big difference. So I appreciate you emphasizing, those bite-sized things. We don't
Yeah.
always have to go big or go home or whatever it
Right.
is. We don't always have to do that.
Right.
Those small things really make a difference and can significantly shift instruction for a teacher.
Yeah.
Yes, so I appreciate, we're not wrapping up. It sounded like I was wrapping up, but
You're fine.
we're not going to go all night because we could, but I do really appreciate you providing this, and you
Yeah.
also will have it. I'm going to make sure that it's downloadable for you to retrieve it, so that you can have it at your ready. And this was really good. I wrote a few notes on mine, and I would advise for people who are looking at the replay, print it out first and then capture your notes on it, because I think you'll get a lot out of it. But yeah, preparing for coaching conversations, I love this because you gave a step-by-step design, taking people clear steps, and this flow chart to help sort it in their minds. And a lot of times we're missing when we're talking about tools. This is a tool that a teacher, a coachee, I mean, I'm sorry, a coach can definitely have in his or her toolbox, because it's simple and plain.
Yep.
Sometimes we don't need like pages of narrative. Just tell me
Right.
what it is and let me get to it. So again, I appreciate this document. So before we do head out, because we're rounding up the hour, right? Like already. Linda,
Yeah.
if you could leave one or two pieces of advice for coaches when it comes to having or preparing for coaching conversations, what would that advice be?
One piece of advice would be to like write yourself a sticky note that says prepping for coaching is part of my job or something. Put it somewhere just as a reminder, because it really is one of the hardest things for us to wrap our minds. I remember doing that out of the classroom and being like, wait, I need to sit in my office and like analyze data. What? Right. Like, but I had to practice it in order for it to become normal for me. And I also had to find the right times of day, right? Like if I wanted to be available for some of those random conversations with teachers or something, I had to plan for that. Like this takes work. This takes cognitive work for us as coaches, right? This is deeper thinking. And so it's not something that you should be trying to do on your phone at lunch duty or something either, right? So also thinking about like, when are the times of day that you are able to give this your attention? And then like practice with one person first. like give yourself a bite-sized action, right? Like maybe the first thing that you're going to try is practicing bringing evidence to a coaching conversation. Or if making an agenda feels easier, start there and like send an agenda and be like, hey, this is how I want our time to flow, right? Don't do all of this all at once if it's new, right? If you've been doing some of the things already, then go ahead and build on what you're already doing, but don't feel like prepping for coaching conversations is also something you need to do everything all at once, all the time, until it becomes habitual and routine for you.
Ease into it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much, Linda. But before we get out of here, I need for people to know how to find you. And if you have anything that's great coming along, let us know about it.
Okay. Easiest way to connect with me, because it will lead you to all of the other things, is just on my website. It's lindarhynconsulting.com. And like all the social media links are there, like you can find me. And then in terms of like things coming up, well, we're going to be at some coaching conferences coming up. I know we're going to be in Texas together. You're coming to Charlotte in September. Yes, can't wait for that. And of course, I have submitted something to Mind Your Coaching Institute, so I'm so excited for that. Something that I have worked on sharing this year, it's a coaching system assessment. And it's something that it's a service that I offer to schools and districts, but also it's a free PDF that if people want to download it, they can. And I haven't scheduled the next workshop on it. So if people had questions about it, they would be welcome to email me. And I'd be happy to send them an old recording.
That means they have to kind of stalk you until they can find when.
Yeah, come on and well, and I recorded I've recorded too. So if you like needed it right now, you could watch an older workshop that you didn't attend. And that would be fine.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. I appreciate you coming
Thank
on and sharing
you.
your knowledge and expertise.
It's always a
about
pleasure.
prepping for coaching conversations. This is much needed information, and I know people will find value in it. If not now, certainly at the beginning of the school year.
That's right. That's right.
So thank you all for joining us for Coach Talk. And until next time, I want you to go out and be the courageous coach I know you are, because you can do it. See you later.
Right. Have a good night, everybody.